Let me just dive in. So yes, she Carol Palmer Unishe, Irish initially, Swedish Bashishtin, Scottish Dashche, Bishop Chadish Nale, Irish, Swedish, Scottish, German. Don't know if I have any relatives in the room, but I do work now with the COPE program, which is a public health nonprofit organization. And my work is with the food access program. But we also have the Healthy Navajo Stores initiative that coworkers, colleagues of mine work on, and then the fruit and vegetable prescription program. So by work, I semi-cleanse, and this is something that native plants are just part of who I am. As far as I've been a plant geek since I was small, smaller than the little girl in this photo. But I think one of the things I also want to mention as we start is that Navajo and other areas have been declared as food deserts, but they're just not if you know what's out there. And so the objective of this presentation tonight, I'm kind of just updating one that I've done in the past because um, a lot of people are losing their familiarity and their connection with what's already out there. And when I talk about native plants, I really encourage people to just start with what you have, what's there, and start working with that and working around that. But in this picture, then there's the red berries or the sumac in the corner, and then the pinyon, of course, and then the Navajo spinach, amaranth. There's lots of different spinaches, but that's one of the common ones. So this is not a food desert, but we really need to appreciate our native plants for that. So just quickly, native plants are considered to be the resident species that are naturally here, that have been here for hundreds and thousands of years. Now we know that plants move around and they can come around. Their seeds can be carried on animal fur and feathers and such. And so, native can really vary how somebody's going to define it. But there are Arizona Native Plant Society, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah. So the Four Corners, of course, has their native plant geeks. And then there are also in pretty much probably every state, there's at least one or two native plant societies. So if you really want to get into it, you can find people to talk to about it. And a lot of times these groups, now that we're kind of evolving into a different way of approaching COVID, I'm sure that many of these groups will have their native plant walks and things that they'll have. So anyway, if that's something you're into, it's something to look into. So for this area, the res would be considered the basic where these plants are from. But of course, plants don't know borders. They don't care. So that's just a general guideline, because then non-native plants, things that are introduced, they have their ways of getting around. And this is one of our favorite plants that we love to hate. Known by many names, some of which are safe to say in public, but other ones are not. But what people fail to remember is that this did come from elsewhere, and it's actually a plant that in Chinese medicine is a medicinal. So even though we'll call it goat head or bullhead or whatever, in Chinese medicine, it's referred to as horny goatweed because it's supposed to assist with male virility. So a plant is not necessarily a pest in the place where it's from. So just real quickly, so these are things that are here, adapted, and they have their natural forces, they have their pests, they have their good guys, all of that. Whereas the non-natives came from elsewhere, kind of like us Spiligonus, but they have no natural enemies. So I think one of the funny things, if you go into a nursery or the big box stores and you see these plants on display, or you'll see maybe even some seeds, and it'll say, pest resistant or no natural, no, what does it say? Like grasshoppers don't eat this, or something doesn't eat this. Well, it's because the grasshoppers here don't know what it is, and they haven't tried it yet. So wherever it's from, it will have its natural enemies. So because they've moved around, and it takes a while for nature to catch up with some of them. They will thrive, and because they don't have those balances in nature to keep them in more in moderation. So one of the reasons that I came onto this presentation is because I really like to emphasize that we're so losing touch with our native environment, our natural environment. We don't spend as much time in nature as people used to do and they had to do in the past. So they've done studies, and of course, the average person can identify over 1,000 corporate logos and less than 10 plants and animals. So part of this is going to be a little bit of a quiz for you too as we go along. Just see how many nanoseconds it takes you to identify the logos that I will be interspersing here. So that took you a nanosecond, right? And if anybody knows where that is, you get bonus points. That's actually the McDonald's in Sedona. So they had to do teal arches there. So the native plant, though, this one hopefully is recognizable to all of you. When I do this presentation with students, unfortunately, they get very generic. They say, oh, it's a pine tree. But of course, this is our pinyon pine. And just to emphasize the fact that these, again, are things that we want to work with, but they're slow growers. They're tough. They're native. I don't know that many folks are aware that pine nuts per pound, they have the same amount of protein as steak is what I've come across. So, these are things that we're just used to seeing them, and we don't always appreciate their value and their benefits. I'm not necessarily this group. I'm talking about the general population. So, but these are things that if you've already got it, you want to work with it. And so this one again might be a little difficult to recognize right away, but it is the junipers. There's lots of different junipers around this area. Again, very slow growing, but evergreen. But what an awesome plant. And of course, what would we do without the ash from this? So many other uses, and just a really neat plant to have in a landscape, but something that, if you're going to try to plant one that's just small, it's going to take more than your lifetime before it gets to a really nice size. So these are the kinds of things when we talk about landscaping with native plants, we want to also consider what we're trying to achieve and what kind of timeline we want to achieve that within. So logo, nobody had to think about that one, I'm sure. This plant should be relatively easy, but again, not something that's found everywhere. All of these are going to be found here and there throughout the res and throughout the region. But this one, there's more than one oak running around. This is one of the more common ones, the Gamble oak. And so the nice thing about this, again, when we're talking about landscaping, is that some of them can be really pretty. And there's a little picture in the bottom there where the leaves have gone more of a red color. Sometimes they'll just be more of a brown color, not quite as pretty, but it's that change of seasons and that variety. The acorns provide some variety as far as the architecture of the plant, shall we say. So lots of uses, very connected to the history of the region, the culture of the region. So these are the kinds of things that, I try to just bring attention to it to remind people of those connections and of the importance of these plants, because sometimes people just run out with a chainsaw and that's that, and that's kind of sad. So cottonwoods, that's there's a few different ones of those depending on where you're at, but riparian, meaning that they really appreciate being near water. So usually you'll see them in places where they're either right by the river or near a river or in a low spot in the landscape. So you would know that even if it's not that wet now, that at one time it really was, and it enabled that tree to grow, because these guys get really, really big. So the challenge with things that can grow so big is they tend to grow, they have this cottonwood species tends to be a fast grower. And so that means that it can also start to die off. Once it reaches maturity, then you might have issues where it might start to lose branches with high winds and things. And so again, with landscaping, you want to consider those kinds of factors and safety factors. And what is the mature size of whatever you're planting? We're starting with trees, but we'll go smaller. Logo, Target. So I just left this one in here because this is one that people aren't as familiar with, and it doesn't look as pretty and as straggly, but this is the native willow. Um, so it's known, one of the common names is coyote willow. It's also riparian, likes to be by waterways, and it can be a problem if it's, located in a landscape where it's near pipes, um, underground water pipes and such, because the roots will get into those. But when people think of willows, they think of a very different looking plant. And a lot of people will think about like over in Fort Defiance by the hospital there are all those big trees, and that's marketed as Navajo willow, but it's not really. It's a combination of things. So this is the native willow. It's bushier. It's not as tree-like as we're used to. And you can find it in various places, again, where there's more water or runoff from mountains and that sort of thing. So it's something that if you have it, you can work with it, work around it, but it is something to appreciate as well. Okay. Another one that's found here and there, of course, is sage. And this is something that I wish I could get growing where I am, but it is not something that it's just, some of these natives really like the area that they're in, and they don't want to be transplanted, or they don't want to establish in an area that's different. And I try, but I just can't quite get it. But the thing about the sage and the plants in that Artemisia family is that they can be more, um, they're referred to as evergreen, but I would call them evergray because they're not quite that green shade. They're really soft looking and have that fuzzy gray look about them. So, but again, if you want to have variety in your landscape, you also want to think of the different seasons. And sometimes when we get to fall, and a lot of our um, annual plants die back, and on our perennial plants may lose their leaves. Some of the trees, the oak trees and the other trees, will lose their leaves. And so that's when it's nice to have something that's going to keep something going on throughout the year. So whenever you're thinking about landscaping, you want to think of those different seasons and how things are going to progress throughout the year. Okay, logo, everybody should have that one. So plant, most of you should recognize this. We already mentioned it at the beginning, the sumac. This I consider a super plant. It is so, so, so tough. And it's also beautiful. Some of them don't get as colorful, but some of them are really colorful. And this is such a cool plant. I planted this with some kids many years ago over at Good Shepherd Mission in Fort Defiance. And the kids we had 3 plants, and the kids really knocked the heck out of one of them. They were trying to rush. It was Boys and Girls Club. Had to go back. And so that one, as soon as like the next day, it was already losing its leaves. And I was kind of apologizing to it, saying, I'm sorry, and I was planning to replace it. But we did this activity in June, and then the rains came in July, and that plant came back, and you couldn't tell it apart. By the end of the year, you couldn't tell it apart from the other ones. So, the thing with natives is that they are tough, and they are strong, and they are resilient, and they don't need all the pampering that some of these other store plants need. So this is an awesome, awesome, awesome plant. If you can get it established, you should have it for a long, long time. And it can get huge. So that's the other thing. When we think of these little shrubs, and you might get a little, it's basically just a stick in a pot when you get it and you plant it. And then, some years later, it could be 5 feet across. So when you're considering how you want to landscape and what plants you want to work with, you really want to think about how big could they get. And that's going to vary with all the other environmental conditions around you, and whether they've got wind or protection and anything like that. Okay, that one's not as exciting to look at, but a very important plant, greasewood. Again, we tend not to appreciate some of these, but we really can work with them in the landscape because something like this may not be as visually appealing, when you talk about people really like flowers and stuff, but flowers would look really beautiful planted next to this. So think of some of these as a backdrop to some of the things you might want to do to bring more color into a landscape. Because it can provide, it can be your windbreak for your other plants. So that's where some of these shrubs and trees can work with you and for you to provide a nice environment for other things that you want to try including in your landscape. So saltbush, another one that can look really straggly, and depending on where you're at, it can be just kind of just it can grow so quickly, and it's almost a pest in itself. But again, you want to be selective, appreciate two or three, and then just pick out the other ones. But again, in terms of the value of the plant, it's tough and it's got so many uses. So, all right, logo for you. Microsoft action. So this is another one similar to saltbush, and if you've ever experienced this, I have weeded out so many of these as well, because if the rabbit brush likes where it's at, and if it gets some moisture, those little tiny seeds from all those little flowers, they'll just pop up. And so that's the thing too. Rabbit brush can grow very quickly. Saltbush can grow very quickly. So they can be plants that can help you out as you're trying to establish some of the slower growing ones, because they do grow so quickly. They can be your windbreaks. They can be your protection. They can provide some shade for your baby plants, that sort of thing. So these are things to consider. And of course, it's an incredible dye plant. It's really, really blooming in the fall, and I don't know that we appreciate that as much as we should, but it's a really beautiful plant. Um, but it's something I really had a lot of them where I lived in St. Michael's, and I just cut them back to where they provided a windbreak on the west side of my garden area. So think of how you can work with some of these things, because they'll grow back pretty quickly anyway. This is another one that might not be as quickly recognizable, but it's a great little plant because again, it is kind of evergray, called winter fat is the Anglo name for it, but it's just a fuzzy looking little thing. And for those of you with livestock, this is something that if the land has been grazed too much, it's probably not as commonly found. But out where I am, which is east of Gallup. I didn't really say where I reside, but I've got a lot of this all around, and so and we don't have that many cattle coming through here, so it really does well. But it's not that attractive of a plant by itself, I guess, if you're gonna be looking at the visual. But it's a great plant, and again, it can provide those silver leaves, and that softness can provide a nice contrast to your other plants in a landscape. So you want to get familiar with what you've already got, what's already there, and how you might want to design your space using those things, because you won't need to water it. This one, another one that's pretty common, you probably recognize it, might not know what it's called right off the, you might have other names for it, but it's that snakeweed or brooms, and it can be a very pretty little plant. It tends to be found in areas that have been really like bladed or disc or whatever. It's one of those recovery plants, I guess would be one phrase I would use for it, but it's a plant that you'll find when the land has really, really been disturbed and it's trying to heal itself. The snakeweed is one of the first ones that you'll see popping back up there. So I think that's a positive, because I see that as nature really healing itself from disturbances. But other people will say that, oh, it's, that shows that the land is degraded and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, it's all in how you look at it. Tons of uses, very medicinal plant. Again, it's not something that we really appreciate as much. And I think, the fact that it's browsed by antelope, but how many antelope do we see these days? It's really rare to see any antelope in our area, and they used to be quite prevalent here in this region, and they've kind of moved out to the fringes. So, logo. All right, plant. Hopefully everybody recognizes this one as well. One of my favorites. Yuccas are awesome because they do provide that structure and a kind of a different sculpture. They're not as soft, so they provide a nice contrast in the landscape. There are several different varieties, of course. This one that's pictured is the banana yucca, Yucca baccata. And so it can be slow growing, but it's one that can grow very quickly from seed. So if you're able to find the banana that's gone to seed, and I think I have, yeah, there we go. So that big green fruit on the left there, that's the thing that people will, used to be more common that people would use that for food, for candy, make a mush with it, that kind of thing. But that's got seeds inside of it, and you can plant those seeds, and they're great to plant with kids because they're large black seeds. But they will sprout fairly quickly. And so even though the plant grows slowly, you could start it from seed and have a nice little plant within a few years, especially if you were able to bring it inside and tuck it somewhere in the wintertime, where it could continue to grow through the winter, and then just have that additional ability to get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. So I think one of the challenges is, and on the right there is the soapweed yucca, the one that's usually used for hair washing and that. So anybody that's ever dug one up, how those roots can really go down. And so that's where with these plants, I would encourage you to either purchase one, go ahead and invest in one that's purchased, or start it from seed, because to try to dig it up and transplant in the wild, some people can be successful with that, but it can be very difficult to get enough of their root system to where they would successfully survive that. So you would want to find something that's really, really small. And with some of the yuccas, sometimes they'll have little babies around the base where you could get one of those, but it's tricky. So we want to be respectful and mindful of how much work these plants are already doing to survive in nature. And so that's just a consideration to keep in mind. But they're awesome plants, and they will live for a long, long time. And they have these beautiful flower stalks. Not every year, depending on the weather and all the other climate conditions that we have, but just gorgeous. So something that, again, something that you will find in the nurseries and in the big box stores even sometimes, because they're so pretty in the landscape and really used a lot that way. Okay, so this is my little transition to grasses. Those of you with cattle and such, and sheep, and might not appreciate these in the same way, but some years ago, I was told by an elderly that she wasn't raising cattle, she was raising grass. And so I think when we think about our landscaping, we also want to think about incorporating grasses into our landscape as visual and useful plants. So the blue grama grass is something that has, again, lots of traditional history of uses. And it's also just a kind of a fun little plant because it gets that little curly eyelash thing going on. So we just tend to take it for granted, but it's a good little thing. And then the black grama, similar but different. So something, again, though, that the animals will like it. So these are things that the seeds can still be collected and tossed around just to establish. If you go to a nursery or store, they're going to be selling you other things like Kentucky bluegrass and such that are lovely if you want to have a golf course or a little lawn area, but they're not native to here and they just need so much water. Whereas these are surviving on rainfall. Okay, our logo. Think you know who that guy is. But leading to then another one. This is such a beautiful grass and is something that used to be a lot of work. People would harvest this for the seeds as it's a survival food, the Indian rice grass. Those little tiny black seeds can be made into a mush and used in cooking. So it's something that, again, we're very fortunate that people were able to use these plants in the past and survive hard times because now, I think again, somebody out there, rice grass is seasonal, so you don't have seeds all the time, all summer. And so you would need to know that, okay, this is what this is, and this is the time of year when I can get seeds from it. Usually it'll be popping up. It's a more of a cool weather coming up in the spring, but it's very pretty in the landscape. It can be kind of hard to get established, so easier to toss out seeds. And if you already have it, I already have it around me, so I just try to toss out more seeds in different places and hope that they'll sprout from the plants that are already there. Because anytime I try to dig this one up and move it around, it says, no, thank you, and it dies. So again, some of them, they grow where they grow and that's where they want to be. And sometimes it's best to work around that and with them on those things. Um, Okay, another really important, beautiful grass. This is the one that's used for hairbrushes and for sieves and things like that with cooking. So it's something that, again, we just kind of tend to take it for granted as being out there, but it's so beautiful in your landscape. Again, contrast to some of your other flowers and things. Um, so again, this is something that you could be finding the seeds from um, when they're available, which for this is going to be more towards fall. Um, but it can be different times a year depending on where you are and how soon, how hot it got, how soon. Um, but really a pretty grass just for visual. If you even, if for somebody who doesn't know about all of the other history with it, it's a pretty plant. And of course, it likes to be grazed, so handy to have around. All right, your logo test. Everybody knows that one. This is another little grass that can be very pretty. I never used to care about grasses, but I've really come to appreciate them over time because they're tough, and I like that look. They look soft. Sometimes they're kind of prickly, but they really have that soft look about them. So this one is purple 3-on, and it's just small, and it's kind of a clumpy little thing, but it can be a really pretty when the sun catches it. It can be a beautiful little grass. So it's something that, again, when we're looking at diversity in the landscape and animals and birds and other critters that'll come around, we really want to encourage that as much as possible because that helps heal the land, restore the land, and it helps the overall general health of the land. And I guess you call it the wellness of the land. But again, it's another one that can be used for hairbrush if depending on where you're at in the res, because everything's not available all the time when people need to make stuff. So, people are resourceful. Uh, and then that one, of course, you can see from the name, ring muley. I don't know what historical connections it might have. I'm sure there is something that just hasn't been documented that I've come across, but again, another really interesting grass that can be appreciated in the landscape. Moving on to some flowers. I know you're ready for flowers. So this one is one of my favorites because it's one of the easiest words in Navajo that I can think of. Well, it's a little short little word, but such a pretty plant. Kind of stinky. So I know sometimes that if there's a big field of these near you and you're downwind, it's not always the nicest fragrance for a flower, but a great plant. And again, when it's small, when it's just coming up, this is one of the Navajo spinaches. And that's something that's kids don't really recognize anymore, the importance of this plant. Again, it's another one of those plants that is high in calcium, high in vitamin A. So it has had a lot of really nutritional value in the past, and now we pretty much just see it as um, it's just a wildflower out there. But it's also a dye plant, really nice dye plant. So it's one of those things, though, very easy to grow. And there's also a little yellow one that's maybe just 6 inches to a foot tall, depending on the variety, that you can find in different communities as well. But that same kind of little flower cluster. So um, again, this is one that's tough. It'll look pretty without your attention and your time. All right. Moving on to tea. This is another one that doesn't look as stunning in the landscape, potentially as a rose bush or something, depending on your view. But this is an awesome plant, really a tough plant, native tea. And it's one of the ones when I first came to the res, it's been almost 20 years now, but when I tried to ask what the name of it was in Navajo, I got a lot of different versions. So depending on what community you're in, that might not be the correct Navajo for what you're accustomed to. But it's a really cool plant. It cannot be that, again, visually stunning in a way, but it's so delicious as a tea and so tough, and it's got really cool seeds. The one little cluster there in the middle of the bottom of that picture, that's the seed head, and they're just really cool seeds. And so they've got little spikes on them that'll attach to animal fur or people's clothes or whatever, and that it'll plant itself farther down and around. But something that, again, I have a friend who has had to move into different housing over the years, and every time she moves into a new place, she'll take some seeds with her and she'll scatter them in um, the landscape around the house that she's in. So I think there's different NHA housing that has a lot more tea than it used to because she's helped it move around. But it will come up from seed pretty well. It's very tough. It's another one of those that when I was first on the res and working at St. Michael's Special Ed, there was a real nice patch of it, but the maintenance guys kept driving over it and it would always come back. Again, these plants are tough, and that's one thing we really should appreciate more about them. Okay, we maybe this year we'll see something like this. We've had so much moisture this winter, but this one is blanket flower. And this is one that because it's got such a pretty flower, and some of the ones you find are just going to be like a single stem and not as many petals and that kind of thing. There are a lot of different um, subspecies and varieties of this particular thing, but because it's so pretty, it's something that people in the nursery trade have taken and they've selected for certain traits. And so you'll find some that are more yellow or more orange or more red and different names. And I think there's one that I saw last year that was Mesa Sunset and all these things. And so it's a really pretty plant, and again, really tough, and it can bloom on and off throughout the season. So that's another thing is if you want to have flowers, you want to really pay attention to when are they going to be blooming and for how long, because some will just come and go. Okay, and our sunflowers, I think we want to appreciate those as well. Of course, lots of varieties of those now to appreciate. I want to get into a little bit of some of the resources before I run out of time. So this one is a classic. This is the reprint that probably came out in, I think 2012, 2013. I have the one that was first published back in the late 80s, in 1989. I think it has the red cover instead of the yellow and the prickly pear. But this is something that if you really appreciate plants and you want to know, find out more if you're not already heard the stories, or if you're trying to share information with the younger ones especially, there's a lot of information in here, and it was approved. This book went through um, NHA, or the health authority at the time, the ethnobotany, the Hatali Association. It's gotten the approvals that it needed to become published, and so the information that's in there is not all the information, but it's the public information, and so it's a good place to start if you're trying to um, re re-energize some of that knowledge in your community or within your family. And I just put that on there because it's kind of hard to find right now, and I don't know if they have it at Dene College. Had it at the bookstore for a while before COVID, and now with COVID, I don't know what's up or down as far as what's still in print and published and available at the university bookstores. But I looked on Amazon, and the cheapest one I saw there was $40. But these guys, Indian Country Books, had it for $19.95, which is about the price that a new copy should be these days. So anyway, moving on. There's another book that isn't really a book. It could be a book. We're still working on getting it reprinted again, but this one was a project done a few years ago through NMSU. With Gerald Moore, who was the extension agent at the time, based in Window Rock. And so this is something that's now only available really online, and you can download it, but it does have some of the plants. It has the Navajo names, and so if you download the e-publication, I guess it is the ebook, you're able to click on the name and you'll hear a pronunciation for it. There's also a PDF file of this, and that's something that does not have the ability to click on the link and get the Navajo. But if you go online and open it online, you can try to do it that way too, I think. So that's something, but I need to, we've been talking on and off about getting this republished. It was published in a little tiny, like a glove compartment size. It's a lot of pages. That's like 200, 300 pages long. Anyway, it's a great resource. So right now it's an online resource or a PDF resource, and maybe we'll be able to find funding for a print copy again soon. So another resource, if you're looking for plants to purchase or seeds to purchase, or just even as a reference, because they do have a catalog, is Plants of the Southwest. These guys are in Albuquerque and also in Santa Fe. It's a store, retail store, plant nursery. So they have lots of wonderful things if you have the budget that you want to look at that, or even if you just want to go look at the plants and see them and how they're sold. That can be educational too. Sometimes I'll find something that I've never really seen up close. I was like, oh, that's what that looks like. If you've only ever seen a picture, it's nice to see something real. But they're a great store. And again, they have the catalog is available as a PDF right now that you can download. So they're a good resource for our region, because again, these are things that are adapted to our region. So another thing to look into, this is something that was starting up before COVID, and then it's been on hold, and so I'm not sure what their plans are for this year. So it's something to keep an eye out for and check on. But Fish and Wildlife and the Heritage Program developed this Dene Native Plants program. And prior to COVID, they were very actively going out to different areas and collecting seeds for native plants that could then be used for land restoration and for community education and those kinds of things. So they had a lot of things going on that they were really working on. Growing genetically appropriate native plant materials for land restoration. Very cool program. Again, not sure where they're at for the year ahead, but hopefully they'll get back on track and get that going. So keep an eye out or go call them and find out. So connected to that, but not, I came across this this winter, and it's something that just came out, and it's called the Windbreak Cookbook. And so this is something where, to me, it was be cool to see if anybody at forestry would be interested in this, because this was put together by the North Dakota Extension. It was a collaboration between Extension and the North Dakota Forestry Department, and they got a USDA grant to do this. And it's a really cool publication. It's only available online as a PDF, but it's got some of the same plants that we have around here. And they've gone through and they talk about each plant, and they show its characteristics, what it likes, how it can be used in windbreaks, and then what the fruits are. I'm sorry if you hear any weird noise in the background. I have a little dog that is eating her dinner. And she's very old. But it's a really, really cool resource, again, for us native plant geeks. Like, this is so cool. But that's the kind of thing that, to me, when we're talking about landscaping with native plants, we want to look at them holistically, not just as another pretty face, but what other things do they have? Are they colorful? Do they have fruits? Do they have seeds and that kind of thing? And again, people used to really depend on all these for their livelihood and their food and their weaving and their dyeing and all those kinds of activities. And so I just think this is a neat project. So I would like to see forestry take this up. Another resource, if you just want to look into what some of the wildflowers are, this should be a wonderful year for wildflowers because of our winter moisture. But this website, Southwest Colorado Wildflowers, is something that's a collaboration. So that's just a little blurb about how it's something that is meant to be a resource for the public, and it's a really great resource. If you're not quite sure what something is, you can look it up by color, and it takes a little while to kind of get the use of it, but it's a good thing. So wanted to get quickly into, this is actually the front of my house and a project that I have in place ongoing. These things never stop, but just to try to show a little bit of reality. So when I moved into my home, which is in Jamestown, east of Gallup at the refinery exit, it's a double wide that's been here for a long time, and it was kind of put up on a hill. They built a hill, they piled up some sand or something. It's a sloping landscape. So I've kind of done this past over COVID. I was trying to think of what to do with it. So I just started trying to work with it. But I'm trying to work with what's already there. So in the back, you can kind of see the orange mallow plants, and you can kind of see a rabbit brush off to one side. But I swear I've moved so many rocks in my lifetime so far, but all of these rocks are just from around different places in the house and in the back and front. And so just moving rocks and rearranging rocks and locating rocks to make that slope into more of a terrace that I could have different plants in. So again, working with what you have. I didn't go to Home Depot or Walmart to buy rocks or buy gravel or anything like that. I just moved around stuff, and then I bought mulch. Mulch is something that is important when you're planting, just to keep those roots cool. But I just wanted to include a few other flowers and things that are really nice for landscaping. One of my personal favorites, because my last name is Palmer, and this was a Penstemon palmeri, but this wild pink snapdragon, you'll see it here and there. It gets used a lot in the Department of Transportation when they've gone through and done some road repairs, and then they have to revegetate the side of the highways. They'll throw this seed in there because it's a very pretty plant. And it's very fragrant. So this is the only penstemon that is fragrant. It can get really big. It can be kind of small, but it's very pretty. But these things are only going to be blooming for a couple weeks, and then they're pretty much done for the year. And then you have seed heads. So timing, let's see how pretty that flower is. Very fragrant. In the low desert, they can get really tall. I've seen them like 5 feet, 6 feet tall. Around here, they will stay shorter, maybe 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall, but not as big. It really depends on the conditions. So another penstemon that you'll find in the nurseries and from seed and in the out in the landscape is the Rocky Mountain penstemon. It's more of a purpley blue. So again, really pretty flower, but it can get bigger. It starts with a little seed, but you want to give it some room to really establish itself. And then it'll live for maybe 3 to 5 years, and then it'll start to die back, but hopefully it's started new plants from seed nearby. The 4 o'clocks, very pretty. Again, not going to be blooming all summer. They're going to be seasonal. So for me, I've had a couple plants that have bloomed early in the summer, and then the rest of it waits until August, and I don't know why, but so that's when you're working with native plants that are closer to being wild, they're going to have that tendency to just bloom when they bloom. And so if you want things that are predictable, these plants are not your guys. This one though, Arizona hummingbird trumpet epilobium, it used to be called Zauschneria, which is I think way cooler, but it's a very pretty plant, kind of small. There's a similar wildflower. Usually you'll see it in the mountains, the scarlet gilia. That's got a simpler flower, but it's also a red flower. But this one will start blooming later in the summer, and it will keep blooming and keep blooming and keep blooming. So this picture, this is from the front of my house, and it was taken in October before it got too crazy cold and everything died. But it was still blooming from probably August to October. So that I thought was awesome. And it's a really, really pretty flower as well. And again, the hummingbirds, that's got that name because hummingbirds like it and other pollinators like it. So that's just a little more of a close-up when things started to bloom. This is another cool plant that is out and about, depending on what direction you're driving. I've seen it up on the way to Utah in northern Arizona. Sundrops, really cool because as it'll start out yellow, but then it'll fade to orange and then be kind of a pinky red color. So again, for visual interest, really cool. And it can be very tough. There's one in front of Department of Ag that's been beautiful. I'm not sure if it survived this year, but that's kind of what it looks like if you're planting it. And it's one that you can find in the stores. I've seen it at a holiday nursery before, not commonly. And then just one other one quickly, Apache Plume is one that, again, because some of these are really cool plants, but you can't necessarily find them to purchase. But Apache Plume, because it is so interesting, is something that the nursery trade has figured out how to work with. And you'll see these, like one of the places I really see them a lot is just driving from Gallup up to Shiprock and right around Twin Lakes before you get to Tohatchee. There's a whole bunch of them through there. So that's something where if you keep your eye out, different places around the res will have different things going on. But this is why this plant is neat, because it's related to cliff rose and mountain mahogany, which are other really wonderful native plants. But this will have the pink feathery plumes at the same time that it has its little white flowers. So that little family of plants is really neat in terms of the visual interest for landscaping. So this is our last logo. And thank you. I will finish that up. And are there questions or comments or thoughts? I'm sorry I buzzed through that pretty quickly. But I could go on for at least another 5 hours on native plants. So okay, let me look at
Carol.
Questions.
Sorry about that. I was pushing all types of buttons. But you do have a question in the chat box from Kristen. Question is, how would you know when a plant is ready to seed and harvest it for future planting?
That's an excellent question. And my answer will be, it depends. So it's going to depend on your plant. So if you've got a plant that you're identifying as something that you're interested in, then you want to just get to know it and follow its life cycle. So for example, if we're talking about something like the penstemons that I was showing, those pink snapdragons or the blue ones, or there's other colors. There's some little tiny ones that are up in the mountains. Those tend to be blooming a certain time of year, a lot of times in the spring. So when you see that it's flowering, then you can figure that at least, and Bud can jump in and correct me here too, but I'm thinking at least usually 2 weeks to a month after you see the flowers, you'd be able to go back and find it going to seed. And then for things that are continuously blooming, they might still have some flowers on them, but there'll also be some things that have gone to seed. Now, similar to when if you're harvesting tea, sometimes you'll find tea that has the flowers, but it might also have some seeds. Okay, I see the next question. Some of these plants poisonous to livestock. I don't think anything that I included in the presentation are poisonous to livestock, but that's where looking at a reference such as the Navajo rangeland plants reference, that's going to highlight what is poisonous to livestock. And I'm trying to think, there are a couple of milkweeds that are not good for horses. There's that tansy. It's more of the annual plants that have those qualities that become poisonous to livestock, because when it's been a drought and they don't have anything else to eat, they'll eat too much of something that is not good. But I don't think anything that I included here falls into that category, because most of the time I think the snakeweed is probably borderline, but again, that's something that the animal won't eat it unless they're desperate for the most part. So something to be careful of. Let me just see if I can just show one more thing quickly. Okay,
Sure.
Can everybody see that one?
Yes.
Okay, it says Cliff Rose. So this is an example of that ebook of the Navajo rangeland plants. So this is what the page looks like inside the book. So it talks about the details here, but it also has then livestock may use it only lightly in spring and summer. So that's where this is an awesome resource, because it will reference by plant what the relationship is with livestock. But I think, let me see if I have my volume up. I don't know if I can make this behave. No, it's too soft.
Wait,
Okay, did you hear that?
Yeah.
Kind of? Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I mean, where with the ebook, you're able to click on it and you'll get a pronunciation, which I think is kind of cool. But there's always more to learn. Let me stop sharing that. There's always more to explore. So did I stop sharing? Come on, stop sharing. Stop sharing. There we go. Okay, sorry, long day.
Carol, it's Bud.
Hey, Bud.
Hey, I just had a little trick for everybody for when it comes to collecting seed. If it's something that you can get a bag around the bloom, once the bloom is declined, you obviously see it's not going to be showing off anymore. You can actually put a small paper bag around it and kind of cinch it around, and that seed, when it is ripe, will just fall right into the bag.
Excellent.
And you don't have to walk around, keep going back to it and checking on it. And then the other thing is you have a lot of that beautiful Cliff Rose out in your neighborhood. I've seen it incredible this last year. It was just fantastic.
Yeah, I just don't have it by my house.
No bummer.
Let me go back. I know, right? All right, let me quickly share my screen again to show that book. Come on. Hello. All right, let me go back to the rangeland book. Here we go. Okay. All right, so this is the book that I was referencing. So the page with the Cliff Rose came out of this Selected Plants of Navajo Rangelands. And then to Kristen's question about which plants are good for windbreaks, it kind of depends on where you are on the res. Because the other consideration, and I have a presentation I've done in the past on windbreaks, is if there's nothing there right now, you'll kind of need to do something to help get those plants established. Like one approach is just to take a couple pallets and make them into a V shape so that that'll protect what you're trying to establish for a windbreak while it's growing. Because a lot of times if we put something out there, it might not survive the wind to become a windbreak. And so the time of planting, what they didn't really get into here is the idea that a lot of native plants will survive very well without a lot of attention, but they're going to be like babies when you first plant or transplant them, and they're going to need attention. So you'll need to water them, deep watering 2 or 3 times a week, depending on whether we've gotten any rain. So a nice time to actually plant your native plants is going to be in July and August, when hopefully we're getting those monsoon rains that will give them that natural rainfall and help them really get established. So really the best time to plant for a windbreak is after the windy season so that they can get a chance to establish before next year, and start growing towards that. So that's one of the things to keep in mind, that you can start thinking and planning and looking around and deciding the kinds of things you might want to do, but then don't actually do a whole lot of planting until later in the year. I hope that's helpful. And yeah, there are lots of resources about how to transplant a plant. And that's something that's a little trickier to do by Zoom, but I think Jesse probably already has some presentations, maybe on the YouTube already or on the Facebook already, or maybe there's something still coming up in this series that we'll talk more specifically about transplanting.
Okay, thank you, Carol. As far as information from transplanting, if you go to our website and at nsa.nmsu.edu, and I've covered a couple of times in our newsletters. I believe it's I think it's April of last year. You can check it out. There's the planting, transplanting, seed starters. If you just refer back to those newsletters. If not, you can go onto the NMSU website under extension, publications and research, the transplanting topic, and it should come up with a number of publications from our specialists. I do see a hand raised, Mr. So. Go ahead and ask your question to Carol.
Good evening, Carol. Nice presentation. Thank you very much. I just have one question. When it comes to native tea, we see them mostly along asphalts and other places, but I don't see them near rock beds. I thought it was about drainage. Why do you think they grow, they thrive more along those roads and those asphalt edges? I don't see them along sidewalks or bedrocks.
Well, to me, I think one reason that they really grow well along the roadside, because gosh, there are sure some pretty areas sometimes. I know that road from Ganado down to through Greasewood Springs, there's just some really pretty up there, but it's like when it's next to the pavement, it's got that moisture runoff from the rains and the snows that'll saturate the earth right there off the pavement, especially on the roadways. And then it's got that reflected heat from rocks and things like that. So that's what can cause a lot of those plants be so happy and healthy right by the road. You know, unfortunately, that tea was not something that I would ever pick to drink because it's right by the road and it's probably got all kinds of diesel fumes on it. But it's great to collect the seed from that tea, and then also you could use it for dye, of course. But that's why we so often see so many plants right off the roadside, because they're getting that runoff that can't penetrate the asphalt of the highways and the roadways. But I've seen it grow in different places. So sometimes I've seen it like sand, and sometimes I've seen it like clay. So I think it's pretty adaptable, but does, once it gets established, I think then you're good to go. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. So, for your question. And then I was looking at the comments in the chat. You know, Trina, when you're transplanting yucca or any succulent plants, they're easily adaptable. And then I think it's just human nature that we transplant a plant and we, you know, tend to overwater it. And so if you just look up, you know, the needs for the yucca on how many times to be watered, and then also your shading as well. So I'll just say that for you, Trina, but yes, look at the publications. If not, Carol, you know, when is the best time to transplant yucca plants?
I always wait till after the windy season. I mean, sometimes the best time to transplant something is the time you have. You know, if you don't have time, you have to make time and find time. These are the things that are, you know, there are the ideal times, and then there's just the time we have to do something. So, you know, I guess if you had a yucca plant and it just needed to get in the ground, then get it in the ground and go from there. But you want to remember that it's a baby, that you can't just plant it and walk away. It's going to need some real good watering to get settled in, and then you're going to need to check in on it and see how quickly that water evaporates. You don't want to drown it. So it's a kind of a balancing act as you, depending on where you planted it and how big it was when you planted it.
Right. Thank you, Carol. And thank you everyone for your questions. You know, we don't know what you guys are thinking and how to schedule out our webinars, but with your questions, it gives us an idea on what we can provide for, you know, next month and so forth. So thank you everyone for your questions. I did launch a poll. That's our evaluation for tonight's webinar by Carol. You know, before it's over, thank you, Carol, for your presentations. I always learn something new every time. So again, thank you. You'll see there on the screen, we do have a tree pruning workshop that we're going to have next week on March 15th. Remember, this was scheduled a couple weeks back, and due to some technical difficulties, we rescheduled it. So Dr. Marisa Thompson will be providing this presentation. So go ahead and go to our website as you did to get registered for tonight's webinar and register for next week's webinar, and also for the remaining months. Like I said, our website is there. Fairly easy to find, nsa.nmsu.edu. On there, you'll learn more about our program, and then also upcoming events, and then also our conservation planning program, which I'll take the opportunity to talk about. I did talk about it some at the beginning, but we do have 2 new resource planning technicians on the ground in eastern and northern agencies that will be assisting Navajo farmers and ranchers in completing their conservation plans for their respective grazing district and so forth. So if you need assistance or if you want more information, email us nsaproject@nmsu.edu for more information. And we are going to be establishing a link to where you guys can request more information on it or assistance and or presentations for if you're a grazing official for your grazing meetings, or farm board official for your farm meetings, or if you're a chapter official for your chapter meetings or other organizations, please reach out to us. So there's our contact information, myself, and then also Kelly, our website. And then, like I was saying, we do send out monthly newsletters covering, livestock and horticulture topics, and then also USDA programs, and then other events that are happening. And so if you work with an agriculture agency and you're attending tonight, if you have information to share on your program or you have flyers, email it to us and we can get it posted in next month's newsletter. So with that, thank you everyone for filling out the survey, and I'll go ahead and end the poll and end tonight's session. Thank you very much, and everyone have a great evening and great rest of the week. Good night. Okay, so the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project is a New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service initiative delivered in collaboration with the Dene College Land Grant Office and the Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment, which is COPE. This project is funded by USDA's Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. I do apologize, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jessie Jim, and I am the field coordinator for the NSA project. Our field staff consists of who you guys all know, Kelly Lantana, who's our field specialist, and then we have 2 new hires, some resource planning technicians, Shailene Paul and Ernest Deswood, assisting Navajo farmers and ranchers in completing their conservation plan. So if you're in need of assistance or know of somebody, please visit our website or email us, and we'll be happy to assist you. So with that being said, our program does have 3 projects, 3 goals within our project. The first is to improve the operations and profitability and sustainability of socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. Our second goal is to increase the knowledge of our farmers and ranchers' use of USDA programs such as NRCS, FSA, Rural Development and Risk Management Agencies, programs and services, and those of other providers. Lastly, we are aiming to increase the local production and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy food by Navajo families. All of these are accomplished through our webinars, our in-person workshops, and then also our technical assistance that we provide. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter for this evening, who is Carol Palmer of the food program, with the COPE program, who is a food specialist there.